Hey guys, tonight we're dropping you into Yakutia, Siberia, the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, where the temperature has plummeted to minus 71 degrees Celsius, your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, and locals will tell you with absolute sincerity that you probably won't survive this. You're standing in the town of Oymyakon, population roughly 500 souls, who've somehow decided that living in a place nicknamed the Pole of Cold is a reasonable life choice. The air is so cold it doesn't feel like air anymore. It feels like shards of glass sliding into your lungs with each breath, and when you exhale, the moisture crystallizes instantly with a sound the locals call the whisper of the stars. It's a gentle tinkling, almost musical, except it's the sound of your breath literally freezing and falling to the ground as ice crystals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the Global Sleep Squad checking in, whether you're in Australia where it's already tomorrow, or California where you're fighting off the Sunday scaries. There's something beautiful about all of us scattered across time zones, gathering here for the same reason, to drift off while learning how our ancestors, or in this case, our extremely hardy contemporaries, managed to not die in spectacularly harsh conditions. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just stepped off a small propeller plane onto a runway that's more ice than tarmac. The cold hits you like a physical wall. Not the bracing, invigorating cold of a winter morning back home, but something alien and hostile. Within 15 seconds, the moisture in your nostrils has frozen solid. Within 30, you're breathing through your mouth because your nose has simply stopped functioning as an air passage. Your guide, a 60-year-old Yakut man named Mikhail who's wearing what looks like a modest fur coat and felt boots, is watching you with barely concealed amusement. First time? He asks in accented English, though the question is clearly rhetorical. Your designer winter jacket, the one that cost you $400 and promised to keep you warm in extreme conditions, is already failing. You can feel the cold creeping through the synthetic insulation like water through a paper towel. Mikhail gestures toward a van that's been running in the parking area, exhaust pouring from its tailpipe in thick white plumes. We never turn off engines in winter, he explains as you stumble toward it, your legs already stiffening. Restart in this cold? Impossible. Even with new battery, engine block freezes solid in 4 hours. The van's heater is running full blast, and as you climb inside, the sudden warmth feels like redemption. But Mikhail shakes his head. Not too warm, he warns, adjusting the temperature down. Your body, it must adapt. Too warm inside, too cold outside. The shock will kill you faster than the cold itself. Welcome to Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, a region of Russia that covers over 3 million square kilometers, roughly the size of India, but houses fewer than 1 million people. And you're about to understand exactly why population density remains so impressively low. This isn't just cold. This is cold that rewrites the rules of human habitation. As Mikhail drives you through Oymykon's single main road, you notice the surreal landscape. Every building sits on thick wooden or concrete stilts, elevated several feet above the ground. Permafrost, Mikhail explains, following your gaze. Ground is frozen solid, maybe 400 meters deep. If we build on ground, heat from building melts permafrost, building sinks, collapses. Romans had aqueducts. We have stilts. He grins at his own joke. The town itself looks like a movie set for a post-apocalyptic film. Everything is coated in a thick layer of frost. Not the delicate, lacy frost you might see on a winter window, but a brutal, inches-thick armor of ice that coats power lines, buildings, trees, everything. The few people you see outside are moving quickly, purposefully, bundled in fur so extensively that you can barely tell they're human. They look like mobile haystacks with eyes. You see ice fog? Mikhail points ahead where a thick, white cloud hovers near the ground. When temperature drops below minus 50 degrees Celsius, water vapor in air doesn't just freeze. It creates fog of tiny ice crystals. You walk into that, you can't see 1 meter ahead. People get lost 50 meters from their own home. We find them next day, frozen solid, sometimes still standing up. That's not hyperbole, by the way. The phenomenon is real and documented. At extreme cold temperatures, any source of moisture, breath from humans or animals, exhaust from vehicles, even the ground releasing trapped gases, can create a localized ice fog so thick that visibility drops to near zero. People have genuinely died within sight of their homes, disoriented and flash-frozen in what locals call white death. You pull up to what Mikhail describes as a typical Yakut home, a small, wooden structure painted a faded blue, sitting on those characteristic stilts, with quadruple-paned windows and a chimney pumping out smoke continuously. "This is where you stay tonight," he says. "My sister's house. She will teach you how to not die." Inside, you're hit by a wall of heat. A massive cast-iron stove dominates the center of the single large room, its surface glowing faintly red. An elderly woman, Mikhail's sister, Sarjalana, nods at you without getting up from where she's working on some kind of hide stretched across a wooden frame. The interior is sparse but functional. Thick carpets on the floor, heavy curtains covering the windows, and what appears to be an entire reindeer carcass hanging from a hook in the corner. "You stay close to stove first night," Sarjalana says in rougher English than her brothers. "Your body is soft. City body. You need to become harder." She's not wrong. You're already feeling the effects, and you've been here less than an hour. Your face feels numb despite the indoor heat. Your fingers are tingling oddly, and you have a persistent headache building behind your eyes. The first signs that your body is struggling to cope with the extreme temperature differential you've just experienced. Historians still argue whether the indigenous Yakut people originally came from the Lake Baikal region and migrated north around the 13th century, or whether they represent a much older Arctic population. What's not up for debate is their remarkable adaptation to extreme cold. The Yakut, who call themselves the Saka, developed a culture and biology uniquely suited to surviving in conditions that would kill most humans in hours. In January, we have average temperature of -50 degrees Celsius, Mikhail explains, settling into a chair near the stove. Sometimes -60 degrees Celsius. The record, -71.2 degrees Celsius, was recorded here in Oymyakon in 1924, though some say it was actually -67.7 degrees Celsius due to measuring issues. Either way, cold enough that if you spit, it freezes before it hits the ground. Cold enough that metal becomes brittle like glass. Cold enough that if you go outside without proper clothing, you have maybe 10 minutes before unconsciousness, 20 before death. And here's the quirky detail that always gets me. Oymyakon's name comes from the Yakut word kiam, meaning unfrozen patch of water. The irony is delicious. The coldest inhabited place on Earth is named after a thermal spring that prevented a section of the local river from freezing, making it a traditional stopping point for reindeer herders. They'd water their reindeer at the unfrozen spring, and gradually, a permanent settlement emerged. Humans looked at a place where the average winter temperature is -50 degrees Celsius and thought, "You know what? Let's stay." Sarjalana brings you a cup of something hot and dark. "Milk tea," she says, "with butter and salt. You drink." It's not a suggestion. The tea tastes strange, rich and fatty and nothing like any tea you've had before. But the warmth spreading through your chest is immediate and wonderful. "Tonight, you sleep here by stove," she continues. "Tomorrow, Mikhail shows you the town. Tomorrow night." She exchanges a look with her brother, and they both smile in a way that doesn't feel entirely comforting. Tomorrow night, you learn what real cold means. Outside, through the quadruple-paned window, you can see darkness falling even though it's only 3 in the afternoon. This far north, winter days are brutally short. You'll get maybe 4 to 5 hours of weak, slanted sunlight at best. The rest is darkness, cold, and the constant, gnawing awareness that you are living in a place that is actively trying to kill you. You finish your butter tea and huddle closer to the stove, watching the flames dance behind the iron grate. Your phone, which you foolishly took out of your pocket earlier to snap a photo, is now refusing to turn on. The lithium battery has literally frozen. Your expensive watch has stopped working. The moisturizer you applied this morning has formed an odd, waxy coating on your skin. Mikhail notices your inventory of small failures and chuckles. Technology doesn't work here, he says. Not your technology. Here we use old methods. Fire, fur, fat. These things don't freeze, don't stop working. These things keep you alive. As you settle onto the thick pile of furs that will serve as your bed, positioned as close to the stove as possible without actually catching fire, you realize that you've entered a world where modernity has made very few inroads. This isn't poverty or backwardness. It's profound adaptation. The Yakut have stripped away everything that doesn't work at -71 degrees Celsius and kept only what does. And tomorrow you'll start learning whether you can do the same. The stove crackles. Outside, you hear the whisper of the stars as someone's breath freezes in the darkness. Your last thought before sleep is simple and primal. Please let me wake up warm. You wake up shivering despite sleeping 3 feet from a roaring stove, and that's your first real lesson about extreme cold. It's relentless. The fire burned all night. Sarjalana got up twice to add wood, moving in the darkness with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this 10,000 times. But the cold still found you. It seeped through the gaps around the door, radiated from the walls, crept up from the floor despite the thick carpets and furs. Your nose is ice cold, your breath visible even indoors, and when you finally work up the courage to emerge from your cocoon of blankets, the air hits your skin like a slap. Sarjalana is already up, working at the stove, and she glances at you with something that might be sympathy. First night is always hard for outsiders, she says. Your body is fighting, learning, changing, and she's absolutely right, though the science behind what's happening to you is both fascinating and slightly terrifying. See, your body is essentially a tropical machine trying to operate in Arctic conditions, and every system is scrambling to adapt. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside you right now, because understanding the mechanics of extreme cold survival might be the only thing that keeps you alive over the next few days. When you step outside, which you'll have to do soon, because Mikhail is already waiting to give you the town tour, the cold attacks you on multiple fronts simultaneously. First, there's the immediate assault on your respiratory system. Air at -71 degrees Celsius is so cold that breathing it directly into your lungs can cause instant damage. The delicate tissues of your bronchial tubes and alveoli are designed to operate at body temperature, around 37 degrees Celsius. When you flood them with air that's more than 100 degrees colder, you risk everything from bronchospasm to actual ice crystal formation in your lung tissue. This is why the Yakut have developed a specific breathing technique. You breathe in through your nose, assuming it's not frozen shut, which gives the air time to warm slightly before it hits your throat, and you breathe out through a scarf or fur collar positioned over your mouth. The scarf serves double duty. It pre-warms incoming air with the heat from your exhalations, and it catches the moisture from your breath before it can freeze on your face and create frostbite points. But your lungs are just the beginning. Let's talk about what's happening to your extremities, because this is where things get genuinely medieval. Your body, in its ancient survival wisdom, has a brutal hierarchy of what's important. Core temperature must be maintained at all costs. Your heart, lungs, brain, and major organs get first priority for warm blood. Everything else? Negotiable. This process is called peripheral vasoconstriction, and it's happening to you right now. The blood vessels in your fingers, toes, ears, and nose are constricting, reducing blood flow to these areas to minimize heat loss. It's an elegant solution to the problem of heat conservation, except for one tiny issue. Those tissues still need some blood to survive. Cut off blood flow for too long, and you get frostbite, the actual freezing and crystallization of your cellular tissue. Here's where it gets interesting. The Yakut people, after generations of living in extreme cold, have developed a measurably different physiological response to cold exposure. Studies conducted in the 1960s and 70s by Soviet researchers, who had a somewhat disturbing enthusiasm for extreme environment testing, found that indigenous Yakut individuals maintain higher peripheral blood flow in cold conditions than people from temperate climates. Their bodies have essentially recalibrated the vasoconstriction response. They still constrict blood vessels to conserve heat, but not as aggressively, allowing them to maintain hand and foot function at temperatures that would leave you fumbling and clumsy. Historians still argue whether this adaptation is genetic, the result of natural selection over many generations, or phenotypic, meaning it develops within an individual's lifetime through repeated cold exposure. The truth is probably both, which is either encouraging or terrifying depending on how long you're planning to stay. Mikhail bundles you into the van, still running from yesterday, exhaust pipe dripping with frozen condensation, and drives you into the center of town. First, we visit the market, he says. You need to see what survival looks like here. The market is less a building and more a series of stalls arranged in a rough square. Everything open to the air because, as Mikhail explains, refrigeration is redundant when the ambient temperature is colder than any freezer. What you see laid out on the wooden tables looks like a surrealist art installation. Massive fish frozen into rigid curves, their eyes clouded with ice. Enormous slabs of horse meat, frozen so solid they ring when tapped. Whole reindeer carcasses, and strangest of all, plastic bottles of milk frozen into solid cylinders. You can't pour milk here in winter, a vendor explains through Mikhail's translation. So we freeze it in bottles, you take home, you cut plastic away, you put frozen milk cylinder in pot, you melt it. Everything is solid. Everything is hard. You watch as a customer haggles over a frozen fish that's roughly the size of a small child. Money changes hands, cash only, because card readers don't function in this cold. And the buyer takes the fish by its tail and walks away, carrying it like a baseball bat. The whole scene would be comical except for the grim efficiency of it all. This isn't quaint local color. This is what eating looks like when you live at the edge of human survivability. Here's a detail that the anthropologists love. The Yakut traditionally didn't cook their fish. They ate it raw and frozen, sliced thin like sashimi because a fuel for cooking fires was precious and scarce, and B, freezing actually preserves the nutritional content better than cooking in many cases. This delicacy is called stroganina, and it's still consumed widely today. The fish, typically whitefish or broad whitefish from the local rivers, is frozen so solid that you can shave off paper-thin slices with a knife, and these slices are eaten immediately with salt and pepper. You're about to get your first taste of it, because Mikhail has bought a frozen fish and is currently hacking off slices with a knife that's seen better decades. Try, he insists, offering you a curl of pink-white fish flesh that's still literally frozen solid. You put it in your mouth tentatively, and it's actually not terrible. The flavor is clean and mild, and as it melts on your tongue, it transitions from ice chip to something genuinely delicate and pleasant. Good, yes, Mikhail grins. This is survival food. No fire needed. Protein stays perfect in cold. In summer, fish rots in 3 hours. In winter, fish stays fresh for 6 months just sitting outside. Your body, meanwhile, is still fighting its private war against the cold. Even with the traditional fur clothing that Sarjalana forced you into this morning. A long coat made from horse hide with the fur turned inward, reindeer fur boots that come up to your knees, and a hat that covers everything but your eyes. You can feel the relentless drain of heat. Your metabolism has kicked into overdrive, burning calories at an accelerated rate just to maintain your core temperature. This is measurable, by the way. Studies of people living in extreme cold environments show that basal metabolic rate can increase by 15 to 30% just from the constant energy expenditure required to stay warm. You're literally burning more calories standing still in Yakutia than you would jogging in a temperate climate. Which explains why the Yakut diet is so heavily weighted toward fat and protein. You need the caloric density to fuel the furnace. Back in the van, Mikhail drives you past the town school. Yes, they have a school, and yes, children attend even when it's minus 60 degrees Celsius outside. School only closes when temperature reaches minus 55 degrees Celsius for the youngest children, Mikhail explains. Older children, school closes at minus 60 degrees Celsius. Below that, too dangerous for walking. You're processing the insanity of what he just said when he adds, almost casually, of course, sometimes thermometer only goes to minus 55 degrees Celsius, so when it's colder, we don't know exactly how cold. We just know very cold. Stay inside. The Soviet-era infrastructure of Oymyakon is a study in brutal pragmatism. The pipes that carry water and heating run above ground in massive insulated conduits because burying them in permafrost is pointless. You can't dig into ground that's frozen to the hardness of concrete. These conduits snake through town on wooden supports, looking like industrial intestines, occasionally leaking steam from joints where the brutal cold has cracked even the most robust insulation. We lose heat constantly, Mikhail says, following your gaze. Maybe 30–40% of heat generated at the power station is lost before it reaches buildings. But what choice? Underground pipes freeze, crack, become useless. Above ground, at least we can repair. Your fingers are starting to hurt. Not the dull ache of ordinary cold, but a sharp, burning sensation that paradoxically feels hot. This is the early warning sign of frostbite, and you mention it to Mikhail with what you hope is casual concern rather than rising panic. He pulls over immediately, his expression serious for the first time today. "Show me." You pull off your outer mittens. Mittens, not gloves. Gloves are a death sentence here because they separate your fingers, preventing them from sharing warmth, and Mikhail examines your hands with professional assessment. Your fingertips are dead white, and when he presses on one, it doesn't blanch and refill with color like healthy tissue should. First stage frostbite, he diagnoses. Frost nip, really? Not serious yet, but you need to warm them now. Here. He takes your hands and tucks them under his armpits. An intimate gesture that would be weird under any other circumstance, but right now feels like salvation. The warmth of his body against your frozen fingers is almost painful, a burning, tingling sensation that makes you gasp. Never rub frostbitten skin, he instructs. Never use hot water. Gradual warming only. You rub, you create ice crystals that tear through tissue like knives. You use hot water, you create more damage. Slow and steady. After 5 minutes, feeling returns to your fingers, along with considerable pain, and Mikhail nods with satisfaction. Better. But this is lesson, respect the cold. Always. One moment of carelessness, you lose fingers, toes, nose. I have uncle with no ears. He was drunk. Fell asleep outside for 20 minutes. Ears froze solid, turned black, fell off 1 month later. And that's not an exaggeration or scare tactic. Frostbite at these temperatures progresses with terrifying speed. Exposed skin can freeze in under 5 minutes at -50 degrees Celsius, and in under 2 minutes at -71 degrees Celsius. The ice crystals that form in your cells rupture the cell membranes, causing irreversible damage. In severe cases, gangrene sets in, and the affected tissue literally dies and mummifies. Back in the van, properly warned and newly terrified, you continue the tour. Mikhail shows you the town's diesel generator building, never shut off, always running, because restarting a diesel engine in these temperatures is nearly impossible without specialized heating equipment. He shows you the graveyard, where graves can only be dug in summer because the permafrost requires jackhammers and sometimes dynamite to penetrate. He shows you the monument declaring Oymyakon the coldest inhabited place on Earth, a dubious honor that the town nonetheless takes seriously. "We have tourists sometimes," Mikhail says with a wry smile. "Crazy people like you who want to experience extreme cold. Most stay 1 night, maybe 2. Then they leave very quickly." He laughs. "But we stay. We live. This is home." And that's the thing that's slowly dawning on you as the day progresses. This isn't a survival challenge or an extreme sport for these people. This is just life. Children are born here, grow up here, go to school here, play outside here, albeit briefly and with significantly more clothing than children elsewhere. People fall in love, get married, have arguments about whose turn it is to refill the stove, complain about their jobs. Normal life, just conducted at temperatures that would kill unprepared humans in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. As the brief afternoon light begins to fade, it's not even 4 p.m. yet. Mikhail drives you back to Sarjalana's house. Your body is exhausted from the constant metabolic effort. Your face feels raw despite the fur scarf, and you've developed a persistent cough from breathing the cold air. "Rest now," Mikhail advises. "Tonight, you will need your strength. Tonight, we test if you are becoming Yakut, or if you are still soft city person. You don't like the sound of that at all, but you're too tired to argue." Inside, Sarjalana has prepared more butter tea and something that looks like thick soup but smells vaguely of blood. "Horse broth," she announces, "with fat and organ meat. You drink all. Make you strong." You drink all because at this point, arguing with Sarjalana seems more dangerous than frostbite. The broth is rich and metallic and coating your mouth with fat, but warmth spreads through your core like liquid gold. Outside, the temperature is dropping as night falls. The thermometer on the wall reads minus 58 degrees Celsius, and it's still getting colder. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the whisper of the stars again. Someone's frozen breath, falling like snow. Your body is changing, adapting, fighting. Whether it's changing fast enough remains to be seen. The traditional Yakut winter outfit that Sarjalana lays out for you the next morning looks less like clothing and more like a taxidermy project gone rogue. There are fur components you can't even identify, leather pieces that have been worked until they're supple as cloth despite the freezing temperature, and a complexity of layering that makes getting dressed feel like solving a three-dimensional puzzle. First layer, Sarjalana instructs, holding up what appears to be a full-body undergarment made from thin, soft leather. This is from summer reindeer hide, thin, breathable, goes against skin. You strip down in front of the stove. Modesty has no place at minus 60 degrees Celsius, and pull on the leather undergarment. It fits surprisingly well, clearly custom-made for someone approximately your size, and the leather is indeed breathable, not clammy or suffocating like you'd feared. Second layer, she continues, producing what looks like a thick wool union suit. Sheep wool, traps air, creates warmth. But not too tight, air must circulate, must move or you sweat. Sweat is death here. Sweat freezes on skin, creates ice layer, conducts heat away from body. You sweat, you die. This is absolutely true, by the way, and it's one of the most counterintuitive aspects of extreme cold survival. Back home, you probably equate warmth with bundling up as tightly as possible, but here that's a fatal mistake. The Yakut have understood for centuries what modern cold weather research has only recently confirmed. Layering with air gaps is infinitely more effective than a single thick layer, and managing moisture is more critical than managing cold. When you move, when you work, when you do anything more strenuous than standing still, you generate heat and moisture. In temperate climates, that moisture evaporates harmlessly or gets absorbed by your clothing. Here, that moisture freezes on your skin, in your clothing, creating a layer of ice that acts like a thermal conductor, sucking heat away from your body at an accelerated rate. The traditional Yakut clothing system is designed with obsessive attention to moisture management, using materials and construction techniques that allow water vapor to escape while still maintaining insulation. Third layer, Sarjalana says, holding up a pair of pants made from thick, dense fur, winter reindeer hide. The fur is hollow, like tiny tubes filled with air. Best insulation in world. Better than your synthetic materials. Better than anything. She's not exaggerating. Reindeer fur has a unique structure where each hair shaft contains multiple air-filled compartments, creating phenomenal insulation with minimal weight. Indigenous Arctic peoples from Siberia to Scandinavia to North America have all independently concluded that reindeer, or caribou, fur is the gold standard for extreme cold protection. Modern military research has tried to replicate its properties with advanced synthetic materials and has consistently fallen short. You pull on the fur pants, and immediately you understand. The warmth is instantaneous and remarkable, not heavy or oppressive but somehow cocooning. The fur faces inward, against the wool layer, creating yet another air gap while the leather exterior faces out. Now the coat, Sarjalana announces, and this is clearly the centerpiece of the ensemble. The coat, called a sun in Yakut, is a work of art masquerading as survival equipment. It's made from horse hide with the fur turned inward, reinforced at the shoulders and elbows with additional layers, and it extends down to mid-calf. The collar is massive, made from wolf fur that stands up nearly 6 inches, designed to be pulled up over your face, leaving only your eyes exposed. Horsehide is stronger than reindeer, Sarjalana explains as she helps you into it. More wind-resistant. For outer layer, you need protection from wind. Wind is the killer. Wind at minus 50 degrees Celsius with 30 kilometers per hour speed feels like minus 70 degrees Celsius. Exposed skin freezes in 1 minute. The wind chill factor is no joke at these temperatures. While scientists debate the exact formulas and whether wind chill warnings are overused in temperate climates, at extreme cold temperatures, wind transforms dangerous conditions into immediately lethal ones. Moving air strips away the thin layer of warm air that your body generates around itself, forcing your metabolism to work even harder to compensate, and accelerating frostbite dramatically. Next come the boots, and here's where things get genuinely fascinating from a technological history standpoint. Sargillana produces a pair of boots called Iterbii that look almost comically oversized. They'd fit clown feet, honestly. But the construction is remarkable. A thick reindeer fur inner boot, a layer of dried grass, yes, grass, and an outer boot made from reindeer leg hide that's been treated with fish oil and smoke until it's completely waterproof. The grass, she explains, pulling out a handful to show you, is special. We collect in late summer, dry completely, then stuff into boot. Grass absorbs moisture from your feet, but doesn't conduct cold. Every night, you remove grass, dry by fire, use again next day. Your modern foam insoles? They absorb sweat, freeze solid, conduct cold. Grass is better. This is one of those pieces of indigenous technology that makes anthropologists weep with joy. The use of dried grass as boot insulation is documented across numerous Arctic and subarctic cultures, from the Sami in northern Scandinavia to the Inuit in Canada. It's brilliant in its simplicity. Grass provides excellent insulation, absorbs moisture, dries quickly, and is renewable and free. Modern hiking boot technology, with all its Gore-Tex membranes and synthetic insulation, genuinely cannot match the performance of grass-insulated traditional boots at extreme temperatures. You stuff your feet into the boots, wearing 2 layers of wool socks underneath as Sargillana instructs, and stand up. You feel like the Michelin Man's Arctic cousin. You can barely move your arms fully, your legs are wrapped in so much fur that you're walking with a waddle, and you can't bend at the waist properly. Perfect, Sargillana declares with satisfaction. Now you can survive outside. Maybe. The maybe doesn't inspire confidence, but Mikhail arrives before you can protest, and he nods with approval at your transformation. Good. Now you look like person who might live. Come. I show you traditional winter house. He drives you, even a 5-minute walk is risky in this cold, to the outskirts of Oymyakon, where an older structure sits alongside the more modern elevated homes. This is a traditional Yakut winter dwelling called a balagan, and it's a masterclass in using available materials for maximum survival. The balagan is partially underground, or rather, dug into the permafrost to a depth of about 3 feet. The walls are constructed from thick logs chinked with moss and clay, and the roof is a complex affair involving layers of birch bark, more logs, and finally earth and sod. There's a single small window covered with scraped fish bladder that's been treated until it's translucent, and the doorway is low and covered with a heavy reindeer hide curtain. Underground is warmer, Mikhail explains as you duck inside. Earth, even frozen earth, maintains more stable temperature than air. Air can swing from -40 degrees Celsius to -70 degrees Celsius in one day. Underground stays more constant. Also, lower structure means less heat lost to above. Heat rises. This is problem in modern tall buildings. Inside, the balagan is dark, close, and surprisingly warm despite there being only a small fire burning in a central hearth. The ceiling is low enough that you can't stand fully upright, and everything smells intensely of smoke, fur, and something earthy you can't quite identify. Traditional Yakut lived like this for centuries, Mikhail continues. Entire family, sometimes 10, 12 people in one room like this. Animals sometimes inside too, horses, reindeer in coldest part of winter. Body heat from animals helps warm space. Historians still argue whether the Yakut originally lived as nomadic pastoralists and only settled into permanent winter dwellings after Russian colonization in the 17th century, or whether they maintained both nomadic and settled traditions simultaneously. What's clear is that their survival strategy relied on profound knowledge of their environment and ruthless pragmatism about what worked. The hearth in the center of the balagan is ingeniously designed. It's essentially a stone-lined pit with a clay chimney that angles up and out through the roof, but the stones around the pit are massive. Each one probably weighs 50 pounds or more. Thermal mass, Mikhail explains, seeing your interest. Stones heat up during day, radiate heat all night. Fire goes out, stones still warm for 8-10 hours. Also, we heat stones, then wrap in leather, put in sleeping furs for extra warmth. Like hot water bottle, but lasts longer. This principle, using thermal mass to store and slowly release heat, shows up in traditional architecture worldwide. from the adobe structures of the American Southwest to the stone cottages of Ireland. But at minus 71 degrees Celsius, it's not a comfort feature. It's a survival necessity. The difference between a dwelling that maintains its heat through the night and one that doesn't is literally the difference between waking up and not waking up at all. Sarjilana, who's joined you at the Balagan, points to the sleeping platforms built along the walls. Furs, many furs, she says. Reindeer sleeping fur is best, thick, soft, traps heat. You sleep in your clothes under furs, sometimes with hot stones, sometimes with dog for extra warmth. Everything is about keeping body heat close. And here's your quirky historical tidbit. The expression three-dog night, meaning a night so cold you need 3 dogs in your bed to survive, likely originated in Australia among Aboriginal peoples but became universally applicable to any culture living in extreme cold. The Yakut definitely employed this strategy, valuing dogs not just for transportation and hunting but as literal sleeping heaters. A large dog generates significant body heat and, if trained properly, will sleep pressed against you all night, acting as a furry, breathing furnace. You're examining the ingenious door system, a double-layered hide curtain with an air gap between, when Mikhail suddenly becomes serious. Tonight, he says, we test your preparation. Tonight you sleep here, in traditional Balagan, with traditional methods. No modern heater, no electric anything. Just fire, furs, and your body. This is real test. Your stomach drops. The Balagan is atmospheric and fascinating as a museum piece, but the thought of actually sleeping here, at what you now know is approaching minus 65 degrees Celsius outside, is terrifying. But first, Sarjilana adds, perhaps sensing your panic, we teach you how to maintain fire, how to arrange sleeping furs, how to prepare hot stones. Knowledge is survival. You understand process, you survive. You don't understand, you freeze. Over the next several hours, you receive the most intensive crash course in Arctic survival you could imagine. Mikhail shows you how to split wood properly, using a heavy axe and striking with the grain, because at these temperatures, wood becomes brittle and will shatter if you hit it wrong. Sarjilana teaches you how to arrange sleeping furs in layers. Bottom furs with the hair facing down to insulate from the ground cold, middle furs with hair facing up to trap your body heat, and a top fur with hair facing down to prevent heat from escaping upward. You create cave of warmth, she explains, demonstrating by crawling into the arranged furs. Like animal hibernating. Your breath, your body heat, it stays inside fur cave. Outside can be minus 70 degrees Celsius. Inside your furs is maybe minus 10 degrees Celsius, maybe even 0 degrees Celsius. Your body can manage this temperature. You learn how to heat stones in the fire until they're almost glowing, but not so hot that they'll burn through leather wrapping, and how to wrap them securely in multiple layers of leather and place them strategically in your sleeping area. One at your feet, one at your core. You learn how to maintain a fire overnight by selecting the right wood. Birch burns hot but fast. Larch burns slower and more steadily. A mixture is optimal, and arranging logs so that they'll catch and burn sequentially without human intervention. Most critically, you learn the signs of hypothermia, starting with uncontrollable shivering, progressing to confusion and drowsiness, and ending with a paradoxical feeling of warmth as your body's thermoregulation completely fails and you begin to freeze to death while feeling comfortable. If you stop shivering suddenly and feel warm, Mikhail says bluntly, you are dying. You must force yourself to move, to stay awake, to add more heat immediately. As darkness falls, and it falls early and absolutely, like someone dropping a blackout curtain over the world, you prepare for your night in the Balagan. The fire is built up properly, crackling and popping as the resin in the wood ignites. Your sleeping furs are arranged in the optimal configuration. 2 heated stones are wrapped and positioned. You're wearing every layer of traditional clothing, and you're absolutely terrified. Remember, Sarjilana says as she and Mikhail prepare to leave you for the night, respect the cold, but don't fear it. Fear makes you panic, makes you make mistakes. Cold is just condition. You manage condition, you survive. Humans have lived here for thousands of years. You can survive one night. She sounds confident. You wish you felt the same way. Mikhail hands you a small bell. If you need help, if something goes wrong, you ring this. We are close, we will hear, we will come. But try to last the night. This is important teaching. And then they leave, the reindeer hide door curtain falling back into place with a soft thump, and you're alone in a partially underground room at the coldest inhabited place on Earth with nothing but fire, furs, and the knowledge that your ancestors and current inhabitants of this place managed this every single night for generations. The fire crackles. Outside, the wind begins to pick up, and you hear it moaning around the Balagan's low profile, seeking entrance, seeking you. You feed another log into the fire and burrow deeper into your furs, and you wait to see if Sarjalana's confidence is justified or wildly, fatally misplaced. Morning in Oymyakon is less a sunrise and more a grudging admission by the universe that darkness can't last forever, though it certainly tries. You wake in the Balagan, somewhat to your own surprise, because there were several points during the night when you were convinced you wouldn't, to find pale gray light filtering through the fish bladder window. The fire has burned down to embers. The stones at your feet are merely warm rather than hot, and your breath is forming thick clouds in the air despite the insulation of your fur cocoon. But you're alive, and that feels like a genuine accomplishment. Mikhail appears shortly after you've struggled out of the sleeping furs, his arrival announced by the scrape of boots on frozen ground and a cheerful, "You survived! Good. Now we see if you can survive a normal day." A normal day in Oymyakon, you're learning, bears little resemblance to a normal day anywhere else you've ever lived. The daily routines here aren't just adapted to the cold. They're entirely dictated by it, shaped by it, defined by the constant need to maintain warmth, preserve function, and avoid the 100 small mistakes that can cascade into death. First up, breakfast. Back at Sarjalana's house, the van mercifully still running, its engine having consumed fuel continuously for the past 72 hours. You discover that meal preparation at extreme cold is its own particular challenge. The frozen milk cylinders you saw at the market? Sarjalana is currently hacking one apart with a hatchet, creating chunks of frozen milk that she drops into a pot on the stove. Everything is solid, she explains, somewhat unnecessarily as you watch her attack a frozen butter block with what appears to be a chisel. So cooking takes longer. Milk must melt, butter must melt, even eggs. She gestures to a basket of eggs that look like beige stones. Must thaw before use. In summer, I cook breakfast in 20 minutes. In winter, 1 hour, maybe more. The eggs are particularly surreal. When Sarjalana finally drops one into a bowl to thaw, it doesn't crack so much as shatter, the yolk and white frozen into a solid mass that slowly, reluctantly melts as it sits near the stove. Frozen eggs cook differently, she notes. Texture changes, but protein is protein. You eat. While breakfast laboriously prepares itself, Mikhail outlines the day's activities. First, we get water. Then we check the animals. Then I show you the coal mine. Yes, we have coal mine here. Someone must dig coal even in winter. Then we visit the school. Tonight, you help Sarjalana with her work on the hides. Every task has special method for cold. You watch, you learn. Getting water, you discover, is an epic undertaking. The house has no running water in winter because pipes would freeze solid within hours despite insulation and heating elements. Instead, there's a daily pilgrimage to the town's central water collection point, a building containing several large tanks of water that are kept liquid through constant heating. Residents arrive with sleds bearing plastic containers, fill them, and haul them home. You can melt snow, Mikhail explains as you load 5-gallon containers onto a small sled. But snow is inefficient. You need 10-12 liters of snow to make 1 liter of water, and melting requires fuel. Better to make one trip for water than burn fuel all day melting snow. The walk to and from the water point, you insist on walking rather than driving, wanting to prove something to yourself about resilience, is brutally educational. The distance is maybe 400 meters, but pulling a sled loaded with water containers over rutted ice at minus 60 degrees Celsius while dressed in multiple layers of fur is exhausting in ways you couldn't have predicted. Within 5 minutes, you're sweating despite the cold, your breath coming in harsh gasps that freeze instantly into clouds of ice crystals. Slow down, Mikhail warns. Remember, sweat is death. You are moving too fast, generating too much heat. Bache yourself. We are not racing. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of moving in extreme cold. You must work slowly and steadily, never exerting yourself to the point of perspiration, because once you're wet, you're in serious danger. The Yakut have refined this to an art form. They move with what seems like deliberate slowness but is actually carefully calibrated efficiency, expending exactly the energy necessary and no more. Back at the house, the water containers are stored in the warmest corner near the stove. If we leave them away from stove, Sarjalana explains, they freeze solid in 3 hours. Then we have ice block, not water. Useless. Next comes animal care, and this is where you begin to understand the full extent of the Yakut relationship with horses. Unlike most Arctic peoples who rely primarily on reindeer, the Yakut have bred and maintained a unique strain of horses, small, shaggy, incredibly hardy animals that can survive the winter by pawing through snow to reach frozen grass underneath. Mikhail's horses are kept in a barn that's barely warmer than the outside air. Maybe minus 40 degrees Celsius inside versus minus 60 degrees Celsius outside. Horses are adapted, he says as you enter the barn. The smell of horse and hay and frozen manure hitting you immediately. They grow thick winter coat, they lower their metabolism, they survive on very little food. If we keep them too warm, they lose adaptation, become soft, die when they go outside. The 3 horses in the barn are indeed shaggy. Their winter coats so thick they look almost like woolly mammoths. They regard you with calm, dark eyes, utterly unbothered by cold that would kill most horse breeds in hours. Mikhail moves among them with practiced ease, checking their water, kept liquid in insulated containers with heating elements powered by the barn's small generator, and distributing hay. Yakut horses are genetic treasure, he says with genuine pride. Russian scientists study them, try to understand how they survive. Special metabolism, special fat distribution, special circulation. Some horses can maintain body temperature at minus 70 degrees Celsius with no shelter at all. Not comfortable, but they survive. This isn't idle local boasting, by the way. The Yakut horse is genuinely remarkable from a biological standpoint. Research has shown that they have unusual fatty acid compositions in their cell membranes, allowing the membranes to remain flexible at temperatures that would cause other mammal cells to essentially freeze solid. They also have a unique ability to shunt blood flow to and from their extremities, maintaining hoof function even in extreme cold. Soviet-era scientists were fascinated by them, seeing potential military applications, though thankfully those particular research programs never went anywhere alarming. Your guide at the mine is a man named Boris, whose face is so weathered by cold and coal dust that his age is impossible to determine. He could be 40 or 70. We dig even in winter, he says in rough English. Underground is actually warmer than surface. At depth of 200 meters, temperature is maybe minus 5 degrees Celsius. This is warm compared to outside. The fact that minus 5 degrees Celsius qualifies as warm tells you everything about the recalibration of perception that happens here. Boris explains that the miners work in shifts, rotating between surface and underground to manage the temperature shock. You go from minus 60 degrees Celsius to minus 5 degrees Celsius. Your body says, this is summer, but then you come back up, and minus 60 degrees Celsius feels like death. Body gets confused, takes maybe 1 hour to readapt. The mining operation is brutal in its simplicity. Drill, blast, extract, haul, repeat. The coal is loaded onto trucks that, like every other vehicle in town, never shut off, their engines running continuously, exhausts creating massive plumes of steam. The trucks haul coal to the town's heating plant and to individual homes, dumping loads that freeze into solid mountains of black rock-hard chunks. In summer, coal is just rock, Boris says, gesturing to a pile. In winter, coal freezes so hard that it's difficult to break. We must use special hammers, sometimes small explosives, just to break coal into pieces for stoves. He laughs at the absurdity. We mine coal to stay warm. Then coal freezes so hard we can barely use it. This is Yakutia. From the mine, Mikhail takes you to the school, a relatively modern building that nonetheless shares the characteristic stilts and brutal insulation of every structure in town. Classes are in session, and you peek through a window to see children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting at desks in what looks like a normal classroom, except everyone is wearing multiple layers, and there's a wood stove burning in the corner supplementing the central heating. School is mandatory except in most extreme cold, Mikhail explains. Parents must send children. Government says education is important even here. Even when it's minus 55 degrees Celsius, children walk to school. We teach them young how to dress, how to move, how to survive. By age 5, every Yakut child knows that touching metal with bare skin means skin freezes to metal instantly. This is absolutely true, and it's one of those cold weather hazards that seems like it should be obvious but catches people constantly. At extreme cold temperatures, metal becomes a heat sink so effective that touching it with bare skin causes instant freezing of the moisture on your skin, bonding skin to metal. Door handles, car parts, tools, anything metal becomes a threat. Children here learn to never, ever touch metal with bare skin, the same way children elsewhere learn not to touch hot stoves. During a break in classes, you watch children pour out into the playground. Yes, they have outdoor recess, even at minus 58 degrees Celsius, and what follows is fascinating. The children aren't running around wildly like kids in temperate climates. Instead, they're moving in that same controlled, efficient way you've seen in the adults playing games that don't involve sustained exertion. They're bundled so completely in furs that identifying gender is nearly impossible. Little moving haystacks that communicate through muffled shouts. Recess is 15 minutes maximum. The teacher explains when you meet her. A young woman named Valentina who moved here from Yakutsk for the job and is still, 3 years later, somewhat bewildered by her life choices. Longer than that, too dangerous. We watch for any child who stops moving, any child who seems confused or tired. First sign of cold exposure, we bring them inside immediately. Historians still argue whether the Soviet-era policy of mandatory education in remote Arctic communities was a genuine effort at improving literacy and opportunity or a form of cultural assimilation designed to break down traditional indigenous structures. The reality, as usual, is probably more complex than either extreme education has objectively provided opportunities and access, but it's also contributed to the erosion of traditional knowledge and languages. You spend the afternoon back at Sarjalana's house, watching her work on reindeer hides. The process is labor-intensive and medieval. She's scraping a hide that's been soaking in a mixture of water and fermented fish to loosen the hair and fat, using a curved blade that looks like something from the Bronze Age. The smell is indescribable. Imagine the worst thing you've ever smelled, then add frozen fish rot and reindeer musk, then intensify it by a factor of 10. This work cannot be done in extreme cold, she explains, periodically warming her hands by the stove. When temperature is minus 65 degrees Celsius, minus 70 degrees Celsius, everything freezes too fast. Hide freezes, water freezes, even my hands freeze while working. So I do this work when temperature is warm, only minus 40 degrees Celsius, minus 50 degrees Celsius. The fact that minus 50 degrees Celsius is considered warm enough for delicate hide work is yet another example of how completely recalibrated life is here. She works steadily, scraping and stretching, occasionally adding more fermented fish water. Good hide takes 2 weeks of work, she says. Scraping, stretching, softening, smoking. But good hide lasts 20 years, keeps you alive. Worth the time. Evening comes early. By 3 p.m., the sun is making its brief, apologetic appearance on the horizon before giving up entirely. Dinner is more butter tea, more frozen fish. You're developing a taste for stroganina, though you'd never admit it, and something Sarjalana calls indijurka, a salad made from frozen raw fish, onions, oil, and salt. Only food culture in the world that has frozen salad, Mikhail jokes. Everywhere else, salad is fresh vegetables. Here, we freeze fish solid, cut into cubes, mix with frozen onions, eat like salad. Very Yakut. As you eat, the fish cubes slowly melting in your mouth, releasing their delicate flavor. Mikhail becomes serious. Tomorrow, he says, we take you outside town, to the wilderness. You will learn what happens when car breaks down, when you are alone, when rescue is far away. This is important knowledge. Many people die because they don't know what to do. You must know. Your stomach clenches. The controlled environment of town is one thing. There are people, shelter, resources nearby. But the wilderness at minus 65 degrees Celsius? That's a different kind of danger entirely. Don't worry, Sargelana says, reading your expression. Mikhail is good teacher. He will keep you alive. Probably. That probably echoes in your head as you settle into your furs for the night. The stove crackling beside you, the cold pressing against the walls like a living thing, patient and hungry and waiting for any mistake. The darkness in Yakutia isn't just an absence of light. It's a presence, a weight, a thick blanket that smothers the world for 18, 19, sometimes 20 hours a day. You wake in what feels like the middle of the night but is actually 9 a.m. The world outside Sargelana's window utterly black except for the scattered yellow squares of other lit windows and the occasional headlight beam cutting through the ice fog. Winter darkness is hardest part for outsiders. Mikhail says over breakfast. More butter tea, some kind of dense bread, and cubes of frozen horse fat that you're supposed to eat like candy. Your body doesn't know when to sleep, when to wake. Your brain becomes confused. Some people go a little bit crazy. He's not exaggerating. And the science behind this is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Human circadian rhythms, the internal clock that regulates sleep, hormone production, mood, and countless other physiological processes, are primarily synchronized by light exposure. Your brain contains a cluster of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus that responds to light signals from your eyes, using these signals to coordinate everything from melatonin production to body temperature fluctuation. Now imagine what happens when you live somewhere that receives maybe 4 hours of weak, slanted sunlight per day for 4 months straight. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus is essentially flying blind, trying to maintain a 24-hour rhythm without the light cues it evolved to depend on. The result is a condition that researchers call polar T3 syndrome, or seasonal affective disorder on steroids. Disrupted sleep patterns, depression, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and in extreme cases, genuine psychological breakdown. Soviet scientists studied this. Mikhail continues, warming to a topic he's clearly interested in. They brought people from Moscow, had them live in Yakutia for winter, measured everything: sleep, mood, blood chemistry. They found that people who don't adapt, who fight the darkness, they become sick. But people who accept it, who change their rhythm to match the darkness, they do better. This adaptation, you're learning, takes many forms. The Yakut traditionally didn't fight the darkness with bright artificial lights. They accepted it, working during the brief daylight hours and spending the long darkness in quieter activities. Maintaining equipment, working on crafts, storytelling, sleeping more than the standard 8 hours. In essence, they semi-hibernated, slowing down to match the rhythm of winter. But now we have electricity, television, smartphones, Mikhail says with a wry smile. Young people stay up all night looking at screens, sleep during the day when there is light. This is backwards. This makes them depressed, tired, angry. Old ways were better for the mind. Historians still argue whether pre-contact Arctic peoples experienced the same rates of seasonal depression as modern populations, or whether the introduction of artificial lighting and modern work schedules has actually made the problem worse by creating a mismatch between lifestyle and environment. There's some evidence that traditional practices, the communal storytelling, the crafts work, the acceptance of longer sleep periods, may have served as protective factors against the psychological impact of extreme darkness. You're contemplating this while staring into your butter tea when Sargelana makes an announcement that snaps you back to the present. Today is good day. Temperature is only minus 52 degrees Celsius. Almost warm. Good day for outdoor work. The fact that minus 52 degrees Celsius is considered almost warm has stopped surprising you. Your perception has shifted so dramatically over the past few days that anything above minus 60 degrees Celsius genuinely feels mild. It's a disturbing recalibration, like learning to think of third-degree burns as slightly uncomfortable. But there's no time for existential contemplation because Mikhail is already bundling you into the van. Still running, always running, for today's excursion into the wilderness. The plan, as he outlines it, is both simple and terrifying. Drive 15 kilometers outside of town, simulate a vehicle breakdown, and practice emergency survival techniques. Most deaths in Yakutia are not from living here. He explains as you drive through the dark morning. Most deaths are from traveling. Car breaks down, people don't know what to do, they panic, they make mistakes, they freeze. So I teach you. Car breaks down. Here is what you do. The landscape outside town is otherworldly in the darkness. Endless flat expanses of snow broken by clusters of stunted larch trees. Everything coated in thick frost that glitters in the headlights like diamond dust. The road is more of a suggestion than an actual paved surface. Rutted ice that the van navigates with difficulty despite its studded tires. After what seems like both hours and minutes, your time perception is scrambled by the constant darkness. Mikhail pulls over and shuts off the engine. The sudden silence is shocking, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the wind moaning across the empty steppe. Now, he says calmly, we are broken down. Engine won't start. It is minus 52 degrees Celsius. Nearest help is 15 kilometers away in Oymyakon. What do you do? Your mind races. Stay with the vehicle? Try to walk to town? Light a fire? Signal for help? The options tumble over each other, each seeming simultaneously sensible and suicidal. First rule, Mikhail says, watching your panic with the patience of a teacher who's done this many times. Stay with vehicle. Never try to walk unless you can see shelter. 15 kilometers in minus 52 degrees Celsius. Wearing even good traditional clothing? This is 4, maybe 5 hours of walking. You will not make it. Your body will exhaust itself, you will sweat, the sweat will freeze, you will become hypothermic, you will die maybe 2 kilometers from town. So close but dead anyway. This is statistically borne out by grim rescue data. The majority of cold weather deaths involving vehicle breakdowns occur when people abandon their vehicles and attempt to walk to safety. Disorientation from cold exposure, exhaustion from fighting through snow, and the sheer metabolic drain of moving in extreme cold combine to kill even relatively prepared individuals. Second rule, he continues, you must create warmth immediately. Heat from engine will keep passenger compartment warm for maybe 1 hour, then temperature inside vehicle will match outside. You need fire. He pops the van's back hatch, revealing an emergency kit that looks like it could sustain a small expedition. Sleeping bags, food, water, a metal bucket, an axe, dried wood, matches in a waterproof container, candles, and bizarrely, a large tin can with holes punched in its sides. This is emergency heater, Mikhail explains, holding up the can. Old Siberian trick. You put candles inside can, 3 for candles, and the metal amplifies heat. Very dangerous in enclosed space because carbon monoxide, but if you crack window for ventilation and use for short periods, this can keep you alive. Can raise interior temperature by maybe 10, 15 degrees. He demonstrates, setting up the candle heater in the center of the van floor, lighting 3 thick candles inside the can. Almost immediately, you can feel radiant heat emanating from the metal. It's not much, certainly not enough to make the van comfortable, but it's the difference between minus 52 degrees Celsius and minus 37 degrees Celsius, which at this point feels like the difference between Antarctica and the Caribbean. But candles burn out, he continues. 3 candles last maybe 6 hours. Then what? You need to be able to make real fire outside vehicle, because overnight you must have heat source. Here's where your education becomes intensely practical. Mikhail teaches you to clear a patch of ground, scraping away snow to expose the frozen earth beneath, because snow will melt and extinguish your fire. He shows you how to split the emergency wood into kindling using the back of the axe, how to arrange it in a structure that will catch and burn efficiently, how to light it using matches that must be kept dry and warm. He keeps them inside his coat against his body. The fire, when it finally catches, is ridiculously difficult to start. The wood is so cold that it resists ignition. The wind keeps threatening to blow out your precious matches, and your fingers, even in mittens, are going numb from the exposure required to manipulate the small pieces of kindling. But finally, a small flame catches, spreads, and you have fire. Fire is life, Mikhail says simply, holding his hands toward the flames. With fire, you can survive weeks if necessary. You can melt snow for water, you can warm yourself, you can signal for rescue. Without fire, you have hours at best. He's brought additional supplies to simulate a longer emergency. A metal pot for melting snow, some dried meat and fish, and a large piece of reflective material. essentially a survival blanket. Fire only warms one side of body, he explains. So you put reflector behind you, it bounces heat back, warms your back while fire warms your front. Also, reflector can be seen from long distance. Rescue teams look for reflections. You spend the next hour practicing survival techniques that feel simultaneously primitive and sophisticated. Mikhail shows you how to arrange your body to minimize heat loss. Sitting rather than standing, tucking your extremities close to your core, moving periodically but not so much that you sweat. He demonstrates how to use the van itself as a windbreak, positioning yourself in the lee side where the wind can't strip away your body heat as aggressively. Most surreally, he teaches you the emergency sleep system. If you must sleep while waiting for rescue, you need to do it in shifts if there are multiple people, with one person always maintaining the fire. People fall asleep in cold. They don't wake up, he says bluntly. Body temperature drops during sleep. At minus 50 degrees Celsius, if fire goes out while you sleep, you die in your sleep. So someone must always stay awake, always feed fire, always check on sleeping people. And here's where the psychological horror of the long darkness becomes truly apparent. In summer, rescue comes fast because helicopter can fly, can see you from sky, Mikhail explains. In winter, helicopter cannot fly safely in extreme cold and darkness. Rescue comes by vehicle, by snowmobile, and they must search in dark. If you are off-road, they might not find you for days. You must be prepared to survive 3, 4, maybe 5 days alone. The thought of 5 days stranded in the wilderness at minus 52 degrees Celsius, in near total darkness, keeping a fire going continuously, rationing supplies, fighting off the creeping hypothermia and the psychological weight of isolation. It's genuinely nightmarish. And yet people have survived exactly this scenario. Mikhail tells you about a truck driver who broke down 30 kilometers from the nearest settlement, survived for 8 days by burning parts of his cargo and melting snow, was finally found by chance when hunters passed nearby. He lost 3 toes and 4 fingers to frostbite, Mikhail says matter-of-factly. But he lived, because he knew. Stay with vehicle, make fire, don't panic, wait for rescue. After the fire training comes something even more unsettling: hallucination preparedness. Mikhail's expression becomes serious as he banks the fire and turns to face you. I must tell you something that guides don't usually discuss, something people don't like to talk about, but you need to know. He pauses, choosing his words carefully. In extreme cold, in darkness, especially if you are alone, your mind begins to create things that are not there. You hear voices calling your name. You see lights in the distance that don't exist. You feel convinced that walking in a certain direction will lead to safety, even when you know logically there is nothing there. This is not madness. This is your brain struggling with sensory deprivation and cold stress. This phenomenon is well documented in extreme environment psychology, though it's less well known than altitude-induced hallucinations. The combination of cold stress, darkness, isolation, and the pressure of survival creates a perfect storm for perceptual distortions. Experienced polar explorers report hearing phantom footsteps, seeing shadowy figures in their peripheral vision, and experiencing overwhelming compulsions to behave irrationally. Soviet researchers called it the third man syndrome. Mikhail continues, feeling that someone else is with you, even when you are alone. Sometimes this feeling is comforting. People report feeling like a guide or protector is present. Sometimes it is frightening, the presence feels hostile or wrong. But always, it is not real. He looks at you intently. If you are ever alone in cold and darkness, and you begin to see or hear things, you must remember, it is your brain creating illusions. Do not follow phantom lights. Do not respond to voices calling you. Do not trust sudden intuitions about direction or safety. Trust only what you know factually. Stay with vehicle, maintain fire, wait for rescue. The casual way he discusses hallucinations, as if they're an expected part of extreme cold survival like frostbite or hypothermia, is deeply unnerving. This isn't mysticism or superstition. This is a recognized medical phenomenon that you might actually experience. As if to punctuate this lesson, a strange sound drifts across the steppe. A low, moaning cry that could be wind, could be an animal, could be something else entirely. Your whole body tenses, but Mikhail just smiles slightly. Arctic fox, he says. They sound almost human sometimes, especially in mating season. Another thing that can confuse you in darkness. Natural sounds become strange, frightening, when you cannot see the source. He checks his watch, a mechanical one, because digital watches fail in extreme cold. We should return to town soon. You have learned the basics. But remember, knowing what to do and doing it when you are cold, tired, frightened, alone, these are different things. Training helps, but real survival requires mental strength. You must control fear, control panic, make rational decisions when every instinct is screaming at you. On the drive back, the van starts without issue because it never got cold enough to freeze. You're quiet, processing the weight of what you've learned. The darkness presses against the windows, infinite and patient. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the headlights, is a wilderness that has killed hundreds of unprepared travelers, that continues to kill people every year despite modern technology and communication. Back in Oymyakon, the scattered lights of the town feel like salvation, like returning to civilization from some primordial void. But even here, even in the relative safety of settlement, the darkness dominates. Children are returning from school in the afternoon darkness. Workers are heading home in the darkness. Dinner is being prepared in the darkness. In 3 more weeks, we reach winter solstice, Sarjalana says when you return. Shortest day of year. Then, very slowly, light begins to return. By March, we have 8 hours of daylight. By May, sun barely sets. The pendulum swings from too much darkness to too much light. And that's the reality of life at extreme latitudes. Nothing is moderate, nothing is balanced. You swing from one extreme to another, 4 months of darkness followed by 4 months of near-constant light. Cold so extreme it freezes mercury followed by summer temperatures that can reach 30 degrees Celsius, isolation and silence followed by the chaos of brief summer activity. As you settle in for another evening by the stove, the psychological weight of the darkness presses down like a physical thing. You find yourself craving sunlight with an intensity you've never experienced before, understanding viscerally why seasonal affective disorder is so prevalent in Arctic communities, why depression and suicide rates spike during the dark months. You get used to it, Mikhail says, perhaps sensing your mood, or you don't and you leave. There is no middle path. Yakutia demands everything. You give yourself completely to the adaptation, or you cannot stay. Outside, the darkness continues its patient siege. Inside, the fire crackles and pops, holding back the cold and the dark for one more night. The Yakut diet you discover over the next several days is essentially a masterclass in how to fuel a human body that's burning calories like a blast furnace just to stay alive. Forget your food pyramids. Forget your balanced meals with colorful vegetables and whole grains. This is survival eating, and it's as subtle as a sledgehammer. Breakfast this morning is a perfect example. Sarjalana serves you a bowl of something she calls salamat, which is essentially melted butter mixed with flour until it forms a thick paste, then eaten with a spoon. No sugar, no flavoring, just pure concentrated fat and carbohydrates. It tastes exactly like you'd imagine butterflour paste would taste. But within minutes of eating it, you feel a warmth radiating from your core that no amount of tea could provide. In winter, we eat maybe 5,000, 6,000 calories per day, Mikhail explains, watching you struggle through the salamat. Your body burns energy constantly, keeping warm, breathing cold air. Even digesting food in cold requires more energy. You eat like city person, 2,000 calories. You will lose weight very fast, become weak, maybe die. This isn't hyperbole. Studies of people living in extreme cold environments consistently show dramatically elevated caloric needs. The combination of increased basal metabolic rate, the thermogenic effect of digesting food, which is actually enhanced in cold conditions, and the energy cost of any physical activity means that maintaining body weight in Yakutia requires eating amounts that would seem gluttonous anywhere else. And it's not just the quantity, it's the composition. The traditional Yakut diet is roughly 50% fat, 30 to 35% protein, and only 10 to 15% carbohydrates, which is almost the exact inverse of standard nutritional recommendations. But in extreme cold, fat is king. Fat provides more than twice the calories per gram as protein or carbohydrates, It's essential for maintaining cell membrane fluidity in cold conditions, and it provides the raw material for your body to generate heat through a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. Come, Sargilana says after breakfast, gesturing you toward the corner where the frozen reindeer carcass has been hanging. Today I teach you how we prepare meat for winter. She's already working on the carcass, methodically butchering it with a knife and saw that must be kept warm by the fire between uses because metal tools become brittle in extreme cold. The process is graphic and educational in equal measure. She's separating the meat into different categories based on fat content and intended use. Lean meat we boil for soup, she explains, gesturing to one pile. Fatty meat we freeze solid, eat raw, or cook fresh. But this, she holds up a strip of what appears to be pure white fat. This is most important. This is survival food. Pure fat, rendered or eaten raw. This keeps you alive when nothing else will. You watch, slightly queasy, as she trims enormous quantities of fat from the carcass, far more than you'd expect. Modern people throw away fat, she says with what might be contempt. They eat only lean meat, they say fat is unhealthy. But here, fat is life. No fat, you freeze. Simple. She's not wrong from a physiological standpoint. Your body can metabolize fat for energy far more efficiently in cold conditions than carbohydrates. Additionally, dietary fat is essential for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, vitamins that are scarce in an Arctic diet lacking fresh vegetables and fruits. Indigenous Arctic peoples have traditionally obtained these vitamins from animal organs and fat, developing incredibly efficient metabolic pathways for processing high-fat diets. Next comes the truly challenging part of your culinary education. Blood soup. Sargilana produces a container of frozen horse blood. It looks like a dark burgundy ice block, and begins the process of thawing and preparing it. Blood is complete food, she explains. Protein, iron, minerals, vitamins. Nothing wasted. The soup she creates is thick and dark, containing blood, chunks of organ meat, onions, and what appears to be chunks of fat floating on the surface. The smell is intensely metallic and somehow earthy. She ladles it into bowls and hands you one with an expression that makes it clear refusal isn't an option. You take a tentative sip and it's not as horrifying as you expected. The flavor is rich and mineral heavy, the texture coating your mouth in a way that's undeniably strange but not unpleasant. The warmth that spreads through you after a few mouthfuls is immediate and profound, different from the warmth of tea or even salamat. This feels like liquid heat being distributed directly to your cells. Horse blood has special properties, Mikhail says, joining you for lunch. High in hemoglobin, very warming. In old times, Yakut warriors would drink horse blood before battle in winter, made them strong and warm. Also, he grins. Soviet scientists studied this, found that Yakut people who eat traditional diet including blood have better cold resistance than those who eat modern diet. Blood actually helps body adapt to cold. Historians still argue whether the Yakut practice of consuming fresh blood originated from nutritional necessity or had cultural and ritual significance that later proved to have practical benefits. Either way, the practice has persisted because it works. Blood is an incredibly nutrient-dense food that's particularly valuable in an environment where fresh vegetables are unavailable for 8 months of the year. After lunch comes perhaps the most surreal aspect of Arctic diet, frozen raw fish liver. Sargilana produces what looks like a yellowish-pink frozen block and begins shaving thin slices from it with a knife. Fish liver is richest food, she announces. More vitamins than any vegetable.
Vitamin A, vitamin D, omega fat.
1 piece of liver equals 1 week of vegetables. This is actually backed up by nutritional science. Fish liver, particularly from cold water species, is extraordinarily rich in fat-soluble vitamins and omega-3 fatty acids. A single serving can contain several days' worth of vitamin A and D, vitamins that are otherwise nearly impossible to obtain in Arctic environments during winter when sunlight exposure is minimal and plant foods are unavailable. You eat the liver slice. It tastes fishy and slightly sweet, melting on your tongue with an oily richness, and Sargilana nods with approval. You are learning. City people come here, they want salad, they want bread, they want their normal food. They get weak very fast. You must eat what works here, not what you want. The afternoon brings a cooking lesson that's more chemistry experiment than cuisine. Making traditional fermented fish. Sarjalana shows you a container that's been sitting in the coldest corner of the house. Not frozen solid, but cold enough to slow fermentation to a crawl. Inside are fish that have been gutted and left to ferment for weeks, developing a smell that can only be described as apocalyptic. Fermentation makes nutrients more available, she explains, seemingly unbothered by the stench. Also, fermented fish doesn't freeze as easily as fresh fish. The fermentation products lower freezing point. So even in extreme cold, fermented fish stays slightly soft, easier to eat. This is one of those traditional practices that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Fermentation increases the bioavailability of nutrients, creates beneficial bacteria that support gut health, increasingly recognized as crucial for overall health and immune function, and produces vitamins like B12 and K2 that are otherwise scarce. The practice appears independently in numerous Arctic cultures, from Korean fermented fish to Scandinavian surströmming to Inuit fermented seal flipper, suggesting it's a convergent solution to the nutritional challenges of extreme environments. You don't actually eat the fermented fish. Even Sarjalana acknowledges it's an acquired taste that takes years to develop, but you watch as she prepares it for evening dinner, rinsing it and mixing it with onions and oil. "Now I show you the forbidden food," Mikhail says mysteriously after the fermented fish is prepared. He leads you outside to a small storage shed elevated on stilts. Inside, hanging from hooks, are cuts of meat you don't immediately recognize. Too small for horse, wrong shape for reindeer. "Dog meat," he says quietly. "We don't talk about this much. Outsiders get upset, they say eating dog is wrong. But traditionally, dog was food source like any other animal. In hardest winters, when horses and reindeer were too valuable to slaughter, dogs were eaten. Now, mostly we don't eat dog, but some old people still do. Part of survival culture. This is genuinely one of the most controversial aspects of traditional Yakut diet, and anthropologists tread carefully when discussing it. The practice of consuming dog meat is ancient and widespread across numerous cultures, but it conflicts sharply with modern Western attitudes about dogs as companion animals. What's interesting from a cultural perspective is that the Yakut didn't, and don't, view this as cruel or unusual. It's simply pragmatic use of available resources in an environment where sentimentality is a luxury. "I tell you this not to shock you," Mikhail continues, "but so you understand. Survival here requires using every resource. Nothing is wasted. Every animal has value for work, for warmth, for food. This is not cruelty. This is respect. We use everything the animal gives us." Back inside, Sarjalana is preparing dinner. More butter tea, slices of frozen horse meat arranged on a plate like sashimi, cubes of frozen fat served alongside, and a pot of boiling broth in which she's cooking organ meats, heart, liver, kidney, tongue. "Organs are most nutritious parts," she explains, stirring the pot. "Muscle meat is good for protein, but organs have vitamins, minerals, special nutrients. Traditional Yakut eat all organs, nothing wasted. Modern people eat only muscle, throw away the rest. This is foolish. This preference for organ meats over muscle meat is another area where traditional diets align with emerging nutritional science. Organ meats are incredibly nutrient-dense, containing higher concentrations of vitamins and minerals than muscle meat. Liver, for instance, is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, containing high levels of vitamin A, vitamin B12, iron, copper, and numerous other micronutrients. As you eat dinner, the organ meat stew is actually quite good, rich, and complex in flavor. Mikhail becomes philosophical. "You know what is interesting? We eat this way for thousands of years, high-fat, organ meat, blood, fermented fish. Modern doctors say this diet should kill us. High fat should give us heart disease. High cholesterol should clog our arteries. But Yakut people have very low rates of heart disease, very low rates of diabetes. We live long lives if we don't freeze or have accident. This is one of those nutritional paradoxes that frustrates Western dietary guidelines. Traditional Arctic diets are extraordinarily high in fat and cholesterol by modern standards, Yet indigenous populations consuming these diets historically showed low rates of cardiovascular disease. The French paradox gets all the attention, but the Inuit paradox and the Yakut paradox are arguably even more striking. Historians still argue whether the protective effects come from the specific types of fats consumed, omega-3 rich fish and game rather than omega-6 rich grain-fed animals, from other dietary components, fermented foods, organ meats, from genetic adaptations developed over generations, or from lifestyle factors, high physical activity, intermittent fasting during food scarcity periods. The answer is probably all of the above. The problem comes when we start eating modern food. Mikhail continues. Bread, sugar, vegetable oil, processed meat. Then we get sick like everyone else. Our bodies are adapted for traditional food, not modern food. We abandon traditional diet at our peril. As evening settles, which means 3 p.m. darkness, you help Sarjalana clean up from dinner. The food scraps don't go to waste. Bones are saved for broth. Fat trimmings are rendered for future use. Even the organ meat scraps are set aside for the dogs. Everything has value, Sarjalana repeats. A mantra you've heard multiple times now. Food, fuel, time, warmth. Nothing is abundant here. We cannot afford waste. This is survival wisdom. You settle by the stove with more butter tea, your stomach full of fat and protein and nutrients you've never consumed in these quantities before. Your body feels different. Heavier somehow, more insulated, generating heat from the inside in a way you've never experienced. Whether it's psychological or physiological, you feel more adapted to the cold than you did even yesterday. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 64 degrees Celsius according to the thermometer. But inside, with a belly full of traditional Yakut survival food, you feel almost warm. The nightmare scenario happens faster than you could have imagined. One moment you're driving with Mikhail along a remote road toward a neighboring village, an errand to deliver some equipment, nothing dramatic, and the next moment the van is making a grinding, coughing sound that every driver instinctively recognizes as catastrophic mechanical failure. Mikhail coasts to a stop, tries the ignition. Nothing. Tries again. The engine turns over weakly, coughs, dies. On the third attempt, it doesn't even turn over. Just a clicking sound that means the battery is already losing its fight against the minus 61 degrees Celsius ambient temperature. This is bad, Mikhail says with remarkable calmness. He checks his phone. No signal, you're in a dead zone between towers. He checks his watch. 1:47 p.m. He looks at the landscape around you. Flat, featureless steppe with scattered dead larch trees. No structures visible in any direction. Nearest settlement is maybe 12 kilometers behind us, or 18 kilometers ahead. Last vehicle we saw was 30 minutes ago. And just like that, you've transitioned from theoretical emergency preparedness to actual survival situation. Mikhail doesn't panic, which helps you not panic. Okay, he says, already moving with practiced efficiency. We do exactly what I taught you. First, we stay with vehicle. Second, we assess supplies. Third, we create warmth. Fourth, we prepare for overnight if necessary. The back of the van contains the standard emergency kit you practiced with. Sleeping bags, the candle heater, some food, water, matches, extra clothing. Mikhail inventories everything methodically while you try to control your racing heart. The cold is already seeping into the van. You can feel it, a palpable presence that seems to thicken the air. We have supplies for maybe 3 days if we're careful, he announces. But we should be found sooner. This road sees traffic, not much, but some. Also, I told my sister we'd be back by evening. When we don't return, she'll call for help. Rescue team will search this road first. He pulls out a bright orange fabric panel from the emergency kit and drapes it over the van's hood. Visible from distance, he explains. Also, I will leave headlights on for as long as battery lasts, maybe 2 hours. This will drain battery completely, but vehicle is already dead anyway, and lights can be seen from far away in darkness. It's 1:53 p.m., and the weak daylight is already fading. You'll have maybe another hour of twilight before full darkness descends, and with it, the temperature will drop even further, probably to minus 65 degrees Celsius or worse. We set up candle heater now, Mikhail instructs. 3 candles should burn for 6 hours. When these are exhausted, we have 12 more candles. This gives us maybe 24 hours of candle heat. After that, we must make fire outside. He positions the punctured tin can on the van's floor between the front seats, lights 3 thick candles inside it. The metal begins to radiate heat almost immediately, not enough to make the van warm, but enough to slow the temperature drop. He cracks both front windows about half an inch. Ventilation, he explains. Carbon monoxide from candles will kill us as surely as cold. We must balance enough fresh air to breathe, not so much that we lose all heat. Your breath is already visible inside the van despite the candle heater. You can feel your body starting to redirect blood flow away from your extremities, the familiar tingle in your fingers and toes that you now recognize as the first stage of your body's cold weather protocol. Now we prepare sleeping area, Mikhail continues. He unfolds the sleeping bags, both rated for extreme cold, thick with synthetic insulation, and arranges them in the back of the van, overlapping them to create a 2-person sleeping system. We will sleep together, he says matter-of-factly. Shared body heat. This is not social nicety, this is survival. 2 people together can maintain warmth that 1 person alone cannot. He's absolutely right, and this is where survival forces you to abandon social conventions. In extreme cold, modesty kills. Body heat sharing is a proven survival technique. 2 people in close contact can reduce heat loss by up to 50% compared to sleeping separately. The next task is water. The bottles in the emergency kit are already starting to freeze despite being inside the van. Mikhail pulls them close to the candle heater. We must keep water liquid, he says. Melting snow or ice uses energy and fuel. Better to prevent freezing than fix it later. As the afternoon light dies, and it dies quickly at this latitude, not a gradual fade but a sudden switch from twilight to full dark, you watch the thermometer Mikhail has hung from the rearview mirror. Inside the van, minus 12 degrees Celsius and dropping. Outside, minus 61 degrees Celsius and also dropping. The thin shell of metal and glass that separates inside from outside suddenly feels desperately inadequate. Tell me the survival priorities, Mikhail says, and you realize he's testing you, making sure you remember the training. Shelter, we have the van. Warmth, we have the candle heater and sleeping bags. Water, we have liquid water for now. Food, we have emergency rations. Signal, we have the orange panel and we left the headlights on. Good, he nods. And what is most dangerous mistake we could make? Leaving the vehicle to try to walk to safety. Correct. And second most dangerous. Getting wet or sweating. Moisture will freeze and accelerate hypothermia. Also correct. You remember, this is good. He seems genuinely pleased, which under other circumstances would be gratifying, but right now just makes the situation feel more real. If a lifelong Yakut resident is taking this seriously, you should be terrified. By 3 p.m., it's fully dark. The headlights are still on, casting weak beams into the void, illuminating swirling ice fog and absolutely nothing else. No other vehicles. No lights in the distance. Just darkness and cold. Mikhail tries his phone periodically. Still no signal. In Soviet times, we had emergency radio beacons in all vehicles, he muses. Mandatory in Yakutia. Then Soviet Union collapses, regulations relax, people stop maintaining beacons. Now we have mobile phones instead, except mobile phones need towers, need batteries, need cold-resistant technology. Old beacons were better. At 3:47 p.m., the headlights flicker and die. The battery has given up its last power to the cold. The darkness becomes absolute except for the faint glow of the candle heater. Now we wait, Mikhail says. We conserve energy, stay warm, and wait for rescue. Waiting, you discover, is psychologically brutal. The van creaks and pops as metal contracts in the cold. The wind has picked up, rocking the vehicle slightly, making eerie whistling sounds through the cracked windows. Every sound could be a rescue vehicle, but never is. Mikhail rations out food, dried fish, some kind of dense meat jerky, chunks of frozen fat. Eat the fat, he instructs. Gives maximum calories for warmth generation. You force down the fat chunks, Eating solid fat like candy is surreal, but the energy boost is undeniable. By 6 p.m., the interior temperature has dropped to minus 25 degrees Celsius despite the candle heater. Your face is numb, your fingers and toes are tingling painfully, and even wearing all your layers, you're shivering continuously. Time to get in sleeping bags, Mikhail announces. We sleep in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Person awake maintains candles, watches for rescue lights, keeps other person from getting too cold. If you are sleeping person and you stop shivering suddenly, I will wake you immediately because this means you are becoming dangerously hypothermic. You climb into the sleeping bag system, and Mikhail zips both bags together, creating a shared sleeping space. The intimacy is awkward for about 30 seconds until you realize how much warmer it is with two bodies in close proximity. His body heat is radiating into the shared space, and combined with your own heat, the temperature inside the sleeping bags is almost tolerable. I take first shift, Mikhail says. You sleep, or try to. I know this is frightening, but remember, people survive this regularly. We have supplies, we have shelter, we are using correct techniques. We will be found. You try to sleep, but it's nearly impossible. The cold penetrates even the sleeping bags. The van continues its symphony of creaks and groans, and your mind races with disaster scenarios. What if the rescue team doesn't find you? What if the candles run out? What if the temperature drops to minus 70 degrees Celsius? But exhaustion and caloric expenditure from constant shivering eventually win, and you drift into an uneasy sleep filled with strange dreams. Walking through ice fog that whispers your name, seeing lights in the distance that disappear when you approach, feeling warm and comfortable and knowing intellectually that this warmth is the beginning of hypothermia. Mikhail wakes you by shaking your shoulder. Your shift, he says. 2 hours. Keep candles burning, watch for lights, stay awake. If you feel sleepy, do small exercises. Flex muscles, wiggle toes, to stay alert. You take over the watch while Mikhail settles into the sleeping bags. The inside of the van is now minus 30 degrees Celsius. The candle heater provides a small circle of warmth, but beyond that circle is brutal cold. Your watch says 9:34 p.m. You've been stranded for nearly 8 hours. The darkness outside is total and oppressive. You stare out the windows, hoping desperately to see headlights, but there's nothing. Just darkness and the occasional swirl of ice fog caught in the faint glow from the candles. This is when the psychological challenges Mikhail warned you about begin. In the darkness and isolation, your mind starts playing tricks. You hear sounds that might be engines but are probably wind. You see flickers of light that could be distant vehicles but are more likely reflections of the candle flame on ice crystals. You start to feel a strange compulsion to get out of the van and walk. Not because it makes logical sense, but because sitting still in the cold feels unbearable. You fight the compulsion, remembering Mikhail's warnings about hallucinations and irrational impulses. You flex your fingers and toes, checking for numbness. You adjust the candles as they burn down. You mark time by the slow passage of minutes that feel like hours. At 11:17 p.m., during your second shift, you see it, a distant flicker that's different from the ice fog reflections. You watch, hardly breathing, and there it is again, definitely lights, definitely moving. Mikhail! You shake him awake. Lights! I see lights! He's alert instantly, looking where you point. For a moment there's nothing, and you fear you've hallucinated it. Then the lights appear again, closer now, clearly headlights cutting through the darkness. Mikhail grabs a flashlight from the emergency kit and scrambles to the van door, shoving it open despite the frozen hinges. The cold that floods in is shocking, but he's outside, waving the flashlight, shouting in Yakut. The approaching vehicle, a heavy truck with massive tires and a searchlight mounted on top, slows, turns toward you. The searchlight sweeps across the van, and you've never been so happy to be found in your life. The rescue team is professional and efficient. 2 men in heavy industrial cold weather gear who've clearly done this before. They have a portable generator, emergency heaters, thermoses of hot liquid, and most importantly, a radio to call off the wider search. You did well, one of them says in accented English. Stayed with vehicle, used emergency supplies correctly, didn't panic. Many people we rescue have left vehicle, or are hypothermic from not staying warm. You will be fine. The drive back to Oymyakon in the rescue truck is surreal. The heater is blasting, the interior is probably 15 degrees Celsius, which feels like a sauna. Mikhail is talking with the rescuers in Rapid Yakut, explaining what happened. You're wrapped in an emergency blanket, drinking hot sweet tea, slowly coming down from the adrenaline. This happens maybe 10, 15 times each winter, one rescuer explains. Vehicle breaks down, people get stranded. Most times, we find them okay because they know what to do. Sometimes, he doesn't finish the sentence, but he doesn't need to. You've survived something that kills people regularly, and you survived it because you had knowledge, supplies, and just enough luck. Back at Sarjalana's house. It's nearly 2 a.m. now. She fusses over you both with butter tea and warm food and scolding about taking risks in extreme cold. But you can see the relief in her eyes. You have learned important lesson, Mikhail says as you finally settle by the stove, feeling returning to your extremities in painful waves. You can know all the techniques, have all the supplies, but survival in Yakutia always contains element of chance. You must be skilled and lucky. Tonight, we were both. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 67 degrees Celsius. But you're inside, warm, alive, and profoundly grateful for both. The morning after your unplanned survival ordeal, you wake to find Sarjalana performing a ritual you haven't seen before. She's standing near the stove, holding what appears to be a bundle of dried herbs, muttering something in Yakut while moving the smoking bundle in specific patterns through the air. When she notices you watching, she doesn't stop or seem embarrassed. She simply continues until she's finished, then sets the herbs down and turns to prepare breakfast as if nothing unusual has happened. Traditional blessing, Mikhail explains when he arrives later. After dangerous event, after survival, we perform small ritual. Thanking spirits, asking for continued protection. Old tradition, pre-Christian, pre-Soviet, very old. This is your introduction to the complex layering of belief systems that characterizes modern Yakut culture. A fascinating mixture of indigenous shamanic practices, Russian Orthodox Christianity, Soviet-era atheism, and modern pragmatism all coexisting in ways that would seem contradictory anywhere else but make perfect sense here. My grandmother was shaman, Sarjalana says matter-of-factly, joining the conversation while hacking at frozen butter. Real shaman, very powerful. Could heal sickness, could predict weather, could communicate with spirits of animals and ancestors. Soviet government said this was superstition, arrested many shamans, sent them to camps. My grandmother hid her practice, performed rituals secretly. Now, after Soviet Union, shamanism is coming back. Young people want to learn old ways. Historians still argue whether Yakut shamanism represents a continuous tradition reaching back thousands of years, or whether it's a partially reconstructed practice that was fragmented during the Soviet period and is now being revived through a combination of remaining knowledge and creative interpretation. What's clear is that shamanic practices never entirely disappeared. They went underground, preserved by elders who passed knowledge quietly to trusted family members. I show you something, Mikhail says after breakfast. We visit someone special, someone who represents meeting of old wisdom and new science. The someone special turns out to be a woman named Aquilina who lives on the outskirts of Oymyakon in a house that's part modern structure, part traditional Balagan. She's perhaps 70 years old, with a face so weathered by cold and time that it resembles carved wood, and eyes that assess you with unsettling intensity. She is last of the old trained shamans, Mikhail explains quietly as you approach. Learned from her mother, who learned from her mother, unbroken line going back who knows how long. But Aquilina also has university degree in biology from Yakutsk. She worked for Soviet Academy of Sciences studying cold adaptation in animals. Now she combines both knowledges, old and new. Inside Aquilina's home, you're struck by the juxtaposition. One wall covered with shamanic items, drums, masks, bundles of mysterious materials, and the opposite wall lined with scientific texts and what appears to be old laboratory equipment. It's like stepping into the office of someone who's simultaneously a mystic and a researcher, which you suppose is exactly what she is. You survived the cold, she says in heavily accented but clear English. This is good. But surviving is not same as understanding. You want to understand? Seat. Over the next several hours, Aquilina provides what might be the most fascinating education you've received yet. An explanation of cold adaptation that weaves together shamanic tradition and modern science so seamlessly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Traditional Yakut shamans could regulate their body temperature through meditation and breath control. She begins. This was not magic, this was technique. You breathe in specific pattern, you visualize heat moving through body, you enter altered state of consciousness, and your body temperature increases measurably. Soviet scientists tested this in 1970s. They measured shamans in trance state sitting outside in -40 degrees Celsius wearing minimal clothing. Body temperature stayed normal, no shivering, no hypothermia. Scientists couldn't explain it. She pauses to prepare tea. Not the butter tea you've become accustomed to, but something darker and more bitter, made from herbs you don't recognize. But now we understand better, she continues. What shamans discovered through practice, science calls brown adipose tissue activation and controlled hyperthermia. Your body has special fat, brown fat, that can generate heat without shivering. Most adults lose this fat, but people adapted to cold keep it. Shamans knew how to activate this fat through mental techniques. They didn't have scientific words, but they had the knowledge. This is genuinely fascinating because it represents exactly the kind of traditional knowledge that Western science initially dismissed as superstition but is now validating through rigorous study. Brown adipose tissue research has exploded in the past 2 decades, with scientists discovering that adult humans retain more cold-activated brown fat than previously believed, and that this fat can be activated through specific stimuli, including apparently meditative practices that traditional shamans developed empirically over generations. I teach you basic technique, Aquilina announces. Not full shaman training that takes years, but simple method to generate internal heat, useful for survival. She guides you through a breathing exercise that's part meditation, part controlled hyperventilation. You breathe deeply and rapidly for 30 cycles, then hold your breath while visualizing warmth spreading from your core to your extremities. After several minutes, you genuinely feel warmer, whether from the increased oxygenation of your blood, the meditative focus, or some combination of physiological and psychological factors you can't say. But the effect is undeniable. This is bridge between old and new, Aquilina says with satisfaction. Shamans use this for spiritual purposes, for healing, for communication with spirits. Scientists study this for military applications, for medical treatments, for understanding human potential. Both are right. Both are looking at same phenomenon from different angles. She shows you other items from her shamanic collection. A drum made from reindeer hide stretched over a wooden frame, used for inducing trance states. A coat decorated with metal ornaments that represent animal spirits. Bundles of herbs used for healing various ailments. Each plant has properties, she explains, holding up a dried bundle. This one reduces inflammation, helps with frostbite damage. This one stimulates circulation. This one kills bacteria in wounds. Shamans learned these properties through trial and error over many generations. Now, scientists analyze these same plants, find active chemical compounds, make medicines. But shamans knew first. This ethnobotanical knowledge is one of those areas where indigenous wisdom has proven remarkably sophisticated. Chemical analysis of traditional Yakut medicinal plants has identified numerous bioactive compounds with legitimate therapeutic properties, anti-inflammatory agents, antimicrobials, circulatory stimulants. The shamans didn't understand the molecular mechanisms, but they understood the effects, and that understanding was developed through careful observation and experimentation over centuries. But here is an important question, Aquilina says, fixing you with that intense gaze again. Why do old ways work? Shamans say, because we align ourselves with natural spirits, with animal powers, with ancestral wisdom. Scientists say, because we trigger physiological responses that evolution has built into human biology. Who is right? She lets the question hang in the air, then smiles slightly. Both. Neither. The answer doesn't matter as much as the practice. What matters is, does it help you survive? Does it help you thrive? If yes, then it is valuable knowledge regardless of explanation. This pragmatic approach to knowledge, valuing effectiveness over theoretical purity, seems characteristic of Yakut culture broadly. There's little dogmatism about whether something works through spiritual or material mechanisms. If it works, and the framework you use to explain it is secondary. From Akulina's house, Mikhail drives you to see the other side of the old meets new equation. The town's infrastructure, which is a bizarre mixture of cutting-edge cold climate engineering and jury-rigged Soviet-era workarounds. See these pipes? He gestures to the massive above-ground conduits you noticed on your first day. These are modern design, insulated with aerogel, same material NASA uses. Very expensive, very effective. But installation? He laughs. Installation is done same way as Soviet times, manual labor, welding in -50 degrees Celsius, working in short shifts because tools freeze and workers can't stay outside long. High technology, low-tech methods. The heating plant that keeps Oymyakon alive is a perfect example of this juxtaposition. The building itself is Soviet-era concrete, crumbling and stained, but inside are modern German boilers and monitoring systems. The control room features both cutting-edge digital displays and ancient analog gauges, because, as the chief engineer explains, digital systems fail in cold. Screens crack, circuits malfunction. Analog gauges always work. We keep both systems, digital for efficiency, analog for reliability. This redundancy and systems thinking appears everywhere once you start looking for it. Houses have modern electric heating but also traditional stoves. Vehicles have modern engines but are modified with block heaters and battery warmers. Communication relies on cell towers, but many people keep old CB radios as backup. Soviet engineers who worked in Yakutia learned important lesson, Mikhail explains. You cannot depend on single system. Everything fails eventually in extreme cold. So you design with redundancy, with backups, with low-tech alternatives. Modern technology gives us comfort and efficiency. Old technology gives us survival. We need both. Back in town, you witness a perfect example of indigenous knowledge influencing modern practice. A construction crew building a new house is consulting with an elderly Yakut man about the precise angle and depth of the stilts. The man isn't an engineer, he's a traditional builder who learned from his father, knowledge passed down about how permafrost behaves in this specific location. Soviet engineers tried to build without asking local knowledge. One of the construction crew tells you, they came with plans from Moscow, calculations from universities. They build apartments on stilts, but they get angle wrong or depth wrong, or they don't account for how permafrost shifts. Buildings sink, crack, become dangerous. Now, we use modern materials and engineering, but we also ask elders who have watched this ground for 70 years. Both knowledges together make better buildings. Your final stop for the day is unexpected. A small museum dedicated to the history of Oymyakon and Yakutia broadly. It's really just 2 rooms in a municipal building, but it contains a fascinating collection of artifacts spanning from traditional nomadic culture through the Soviet period to the present. One display case contains traditional clothing similar to what you've been wearing, alongside modern cold weather gear. The placard explains that while synthetic materials have improved, they still haven't matched the performance of properly prepared reindeer fur for extreme cold. Another case shows the evolution of transportation, from reindeer sleds to Soviet-era vehicles to modern trucks with extreme cold modifications. But the most striking display is a collection of photographs showing Oymyakon through the decades. Traditional balagans in the early 20th century, Soviet-era industrial development, modern buildings, and finally, images of young people. Some in traditional Yakut dress, some in modern clothing, gathered around what appears to be a ceremonial fire. This is Isyak Festival. The museum curator explains. Traditional Yakut celebration of summer solstice was banned during Soviet times as superstition. Now is celebrated again. Big festival with thousands of people. Young people learn traditional dances, traditional songs, traditional games. They wear old costumes, they perform old rituals. Then they go home, post photos on Instagram, check TikTok on their phones. She laughs at the contradiction, but it's a warm laugh, not mocking. This is modern Yakutia. We are not preserved in museum, not frozen in past. We take what works from old ways, we take what works from new ways, we create something unique. Traditional knowledge helps us survive extreme cold. Modern technology makes survival more comfortable. We need both, so we keep both. As evening settles, 3:30 p.m. darkness again. You reflect on everything you've seen today. The shamanic breathing techniques that have scientific backing. The traditional building knowledge that supplements modern engineering. The cultural practices that were suppressed, survived underground, and are now resurging among young people who navigate them alongside global digital culture. It's a reminder that adaptation isn't about choosing between old and new, traditional and modern, spiritual and scientific. Real adaptation, the kind that allows humans to thrive in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, requires integrating every source of useful knowledge, regardless of its origin or framework. Back at Sarjalana's house, you practice the breathing technique Akulina taught you, sitting by the stove, visualizing warmth spreading through your body. Whether it's working through brown fat activation or placebo effect or spiritual alignment with ancestral wisdom, you can't say. But you feel warmer, and in Yakutia, that's what matters. The morning of your final full day in Oymyakon arrives with an announcement from Mikhail that makes your stomach drop. Tonight, we go for the full experience. Tonight, the forecast is for minus 71 degrees Celsius. Maybe minus 72 degrees Celsius. The coldest night in 5 years. You will experience what very few outsiders ever experience. The absolute limit of cold that humans can survive in. You're not sure whether to feel honored or terrified. You settle on both. The day is spent in preparation with a level of detail that borders on obsessive. Sarjalana inspects every piece of your clothing, reinforcing seams, adding extra layers of fur in critical areas, checking that there are no gaps where skin might be exposed. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, one mistake kills you in minutes, she says bluntly. No second chances. Everything must be perfect. Mikhail goes over the plan multiple times. You'll spend the evening in a traditional balagan located about 2 kilometers outside town, experiencing the cold in as close to traditional conditions as safely possible. The balagan will be prepared with everything necessary for survival: fire, furs, food, emergency backup supplies. A rescue team will be on standby. You'll be monitored remotely via radio. It's as safe as experiencing minus 71 degrees Celsius can be, which is to say, it's still phenomenally dangerous. Why are we doing this? You finally ask. What's the point of deliberately exposing ourselves to potentially lethal cold? Mikhail considers the question seriously. Because you can read about extreme cold, you can hear stories about extreme cold, you can even experience minus 60 degrees Celsius and think you understand. But minus 71 degrees Celsius is different. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, you experience the absolute edge of human survival. You learn something about yourself, about your limits, about what humans are capable of enduring. This knowledge, it stays with you forever. By late afternoon, which means 2 p.m., as the sun makes its brief, futile appearance, you're dressed in full traditional gear, inspected and approved by Sarjalana. You look in a mirror and barely recognize yourself. You're a mobile haystack, a fur creature, so thoroughly insulated that moving requires conscious effort. The drive to the balagan is conducted in complete silence, the van's heater running at full blast because this is the last warmth you'll experience from modern technology for the next 15 hours. The thermometer already reads minus 68 degrees Celsius, and the sun hasn't even set yet. The balagan, when you arrive, is already prepared. Smoke rises from the chimney hole. Someone has come ahead to start the fire, to warm the interior to survivable temperature. The emergency team is positioned nearby in a heated shelter, monitoring equipment already set up, radio checks completed. Last chance to back out, Mikhail says, though his tone makes it clear he doesn't expect you to. Once we commit to this, we stay the night. No leaving because you're uncomfortable. Only genuine emergency. You nod, not trusting your voice, and together you approach the balagan. Inside, the contrast with the outside is immediate and dramatic. The fire is roaring in the central hearth, the smoke rising through the chimney, and the temperature is, you check the thermometer hanging from the roof, a balmy minus 5 degrees Celsius. feels like a sauna compared to outside. But you know this warmth is fragile, maintained only through constant fire tending, and outside, the temperature is dropping fast as true night approaches. The first few hours are almost pleasant. You and Mikhail sit by the fire, eating dried fish and fat, drinking butter tea, talking quietly. The balagan creaks and groans as the temperature drops, the logs contracting, the frozen earth settling. Every so often, Mikhail adds wood to the fire, carefully selecting pieces to maintain steady heat output. At 5 p.m., the thermometer outside, mounted just outside the entrance, reads -70 degrees Celsius. Inside, the temperature has dropped to -8 degrees Celsius despite the fire. "It begins," Mikhail says quietly. And he's right. What you've experienced up until now has been extreme cold, certainly, but this is something else entirely. This is cold that feels malevolent, purposeful, like it's actively hunting for any weakness in your defenses. You can feel it around the edges of the fire's warmth. A presence, pressing in from all sides, probing for gaps. The entrance curtain, despite being triple-layered reindeer hide, has frost forming on its interior surface. The walls are developing a coating of ice from the moisture in your breath, freezing on contact with the cold-soaked wood. "We must maintain fire perfectly," Mikhail instructs. "Not too hot, we can't afford to sweat. Not too cool. We can't afford to let interior temperature drop below -10 degrees Celsius. Perfect balance." Maintaining this balance becomes your entire focus for the next several hours. Too much wood and the fire roars up, heating the balagan to uncomfortable levels and making you perspire despite the cold. Too little wood and the fire dies down. The cold creeps closer, and you start shivering uncontrollably. At 7 p.m., the outside thermometer reads -71 degrees Celsius. Inside, -12 degrees Celsius. This is when the true psychological challenge begins. The cold is now so extreme that it's making sounds. Not the whisper of the stars you've heard before, but deeper groans and cracks from the earth itself. The permafrost is contracting with the temperature drop, creating sounds like distant thunder or artillery fire. Trees outside are exploding, yes, actually exploding, as the sap inside them freezes, expands, and ruptures the wood with cracks like rifle shots. "This is normal," Mikhail says, seeing your startled reaction to a particularly loud crack. "At these temperatures, many things break. Trees, metal, sometimes even rocks crack. The cold is so powerful it destroys solid matter." You try to imagine what -71 degrees Celsius means in concrete terms. It's colder than the surface of Mars during winter. It's approaching the temperature at which carbon dioxide freezes solid. It's cold enough that if you threw a cup of water into the air, it would freeze before hitting the ground. Not into ice pellets, but into a cloud of ice crystals. And you're sitting in a partially underground shelter, separated from this apocalyptic cold by a few feet of frozen earth and some logs, kept alive by fire and fur. At 8 p.m., something happens that Mikhail has warned you about, but that still shocks you when it occurs. The fire begins to struggle. Wood that should burn readily is instead smoking and sputtering, fighting to stay lit. The problem, Mikhail explains, is that the incoming air, even warmed slightly by passing through the entrance, is so cold that it's interfering with combustion efficiency. "We must feed the fire more frequently," he says, adding wood every few minutes now instead of every 15 minutes. "The fire needs more fuel to maintain same heat output because combustion is less efficient." Outside, -71.5 degrees Celsius. Inside, -15 degrees Celsius and dropping despite the constant fire tending. This is when you realize how precarious your situation actually is. You're entirely dependent on the fire. If the fire goes out, if you run out of wood, if you fall asleep and fail to maintain it, if something goes catastrophically wrong, you have perhaps 30 minutes before the interior temperature drops to lethal levels. "Our ancestors did this every single night for months at a time," Mikhail says quietly, staring into the flames. "Every winter, every year, for thousands of years. No emergency backup team. No radio. No rescue if something went wrong. Just knowledge, preparation, and constant vigilance." The weight of this historical reality is profound. You're experiencing one night of this as a challenging adventure, with safety nets and modern backups. For your ancestors and for the indigenous Yakut people who developed this survival technology, this was simply winter. This was normal life. The fact that humans not only survived this but thrived, developing rich cultures and complex societies in these conditions, is almost incomprehensible. At 9:30 p.m., the outside thermometer reaches -72 degrees Celsius, the coldest temperature recorded here in 5 years. Inside, despite your best efforts, the temperature has dropped to -18 degrees Celsius. You're wearing every layer of clothing, sitting as close to the fire as possible without risking burns, and you're still cold in a way that penetrates to your bones. This is when the hallucinations Mikhail warned you about begin to manifest. In the dancing shadows cast by the fire, you start seeing shapes, figures that aren't there, movement in your peripheral vision that vanishes when you look directly. You hear sounds that might be the wind but might be voices, calling from the darkness outside. Don't listen, Mikhail says, and you realize he's experiencing it too. The cold and darkness and isolation, they create these perceptions. Your brain is trying to make sense of extreme sensory conditions. It fills in gaps with invented information. Ignore it. But ignoring it is easier said than done. The figures in the shadows seem insistent. The voices seem to know your name. You feel an almost overwhelming compulsion to go outside, to walk into the darkness, as if something out there needs you, is calling you specifically. This is the dangerous time, Mikhail says, his voice cutting through the confusion. This is when people make fatal mistakes. They become convinced they see rescue lights that don't exist. They believe they hear people calling for help. They walk outside to investigate and freeze within minutes. You must maintain rational thought. You must remember, these perceptions are not real. You focus on the fire, on the physical sensations of cold and warmth, on the concrete reality of the Balagan around you. Slowly, the hallucinations recede, though they don't disappear entirely. They hover at the edge of perception, waiting for any lapse in attention. At 11 p.m., Mikhail makes an announcement. We need to sleep in shifts now, 2 hours each. The person awake must maintain fire and watch over the sleeping person. If the sleeping person stops shivering, wake them immediately. It means they're progressing toward hypothermia. You take the first sleep shift, burrowing into the pile of furs that have been warmed by proximity to the fire. Even wrapped in multiple layers of reindeer fur, in clothing designed for this exact condition, you're cold. Not the pleasant, crisp cold of a winter day, but a deep, penetrating cold that seems to reach inside your body and touch your organs. Sleep comes in brief, fitful waves, interrupted by shivers so violent they wake you. You dream of warmth, of summer, of tropical beaches, of standing too close to an open oven, and wake to find yourself in a dark shelter barely above freezing, surrounded by cold that could kill you in minutes. Mikhail wakes you for your watch shift at 1 a.m. Outside, -71 degrees Celsius still, the cold holding steady at this apocalyptic level. Inside, -20 degrees Celsius, despite the fire burning constantly. Your watch shift passes in a strange state of hyper-alertness mixed with cold-induced sluggishness. You feed the fire, you check on Mikhail's breathing, you fight off the returning hallucinations, you mark the passage of time by the slow burning of wood. At one point, around 2:30 a.m., you step to the entrance, not outside, just to the curtain, and peek through a gap to see the world beyond. What you see is something you'll never forget. A landscape lit by stars so bright they seem to pulse, the snow and ice glittering like a field of diamonds, and a silence so complete it feels like the absence of sound itself. The cold radiating from outside is so intense you can feel it through the reindeer hide curtain, like standing next to an open freezer, except the freezer is the entire world. This is -71 degrees Celsius. This is the coldest inhabited place on Earth. This is the absolute edge of where humans can survive. You let the curtain fall and return to the fire, humbled and awed in equal measure. The rest of the night passes in alternating shifts of fitful sleep and vigilant fire tending. The wood pile slowly diminishes. The cold remains constant, implacable, patient. The Balagan groans and cracks around you. The hallucinations come and go. And slowly, infinitely slowly, the night progresses toward dawn. At 5 a.m., Mikhail checks the outside thermometer one last time. Minus 70 degrees Celsius. The temperature is starting to rise as dawn approaches, though rise is a relative term when you're talking about the difference between minus 72 degrees Celsius and minus 70 degrees Celsius. We survived, he says simply. One night at the coldest temperature in 5 years. One night at the very edge of human endurance. You can now say you have experienced what very few people ever experience. At 6:30 a.m., as weak gray light begins to filter into the world, the emergency team radios to check on you. You confirm you're both alive and well. The rescue truck will arrive in 30 minutes to extract you from this voluntary ordeal. While you wait, Mikhail becomes reflective. You know what you have learned tonight? He asks. Not just that extreme cold is survivable. Anyone can read that in a book. You have learned that survival at this level requires everything working together. Knowledge, preparation, equipment, constant attention, mental discipline, and yes, some luck. Remove any one element and you die. This is what it means to live in Yakutia. This is what my ancestors understood deeply. When the rescue truck finally arrives, the transition from the Balagan to its heated interior is so extreme it's almost painful. The warmth feels like fire on your skin, your body confused by the sudden shift from minus 20 degrees Celsius to plus 15 degrees Celsius. Back in Oymyakon, back at Sarjalana's house, you strip off the layers of traditional clothing with hands that are still slightly numb. Sarjalana has prepared hot butter tea, hot food, and the stove is roaring. You sit close to it, letting the heat penetrate your cold-soaked body, and you realize something profound. You're different now. You've touched the absolute edge of what your species can endure and survived it. You carry this knowledge in your bones. You are almost Yakut now, Sarjalana says with a rare smile. Not quite, that takes lifetime, but you have survived true Yakutian cold. You understand now what this means. You will never forget this. She's right. You won't. As the day progresses, you sleep for several hours, then wake to more food, more tea, more warmth. You begin the slow process of preparing to leave Yakutia. Your time here is ending. Tomorrow, you'll board the small propeller plane back to civilization, back to places where minus 20 degrees Celsius is considered extreme cold, where winter is measured in inconvenience rather than survival. But as the evening settles and you sit one last time by Sarjalana's stove, watching the flames dance, you feel a strange reluctance to leave. This place that seemed so hostile on arrival has revealed itself to be something else. A proving ground, a teacher, a place where humans have achieved something remarkable. Not just survival, but thriving, culture, joy, meaning, all in conditions that seem designed to prevent human life entirely. The wind outside picks up, the temperature dropping again as night falls. But you're warm, you're safe. And you understand now what thousands of years of human habitation in Yakutia represents. Not merely endurance, but triumph. And now, as your time in Oymyakon draws to a close, let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel the warmth of the stove, not as immediate heat, but as the symbol of human ingenuity and persistence it represents. The fire that has kept humans alive here for millennia still burns, still provides warmth, still holds back the cold. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 68 degrees Celsius again. Another extreme night settling over the coldest inhabited place on Earth. But inside, there is warmth. Inside, there is safety. Inside, there is the accumulation of thousands of years of survival knowledge, passed from generation to generation, keeping people alive in conditions that should be impossible. You've learned so much. The clothing that preserves life, the food that fuels the furnace of your metabolism, the breathing techniques that generate internal heat, the psychological resilience required to endure months of darkness, the emergency protocols that mean the difference between rescue and death, the blending of ancient wisdom and modern science, and finally, the experience of surviving minus 71 degrees Celsius through nothing but fire, fur, and determination. As you drift towards sleep on this final night, wrapped in reindeer furs, listening to the familiar sounds of the stove and the distant groaning of the permafrost, you carry with you something precious. The knowledge that humans are capable of surviving and thriving in conditions that seem impossible. That through knowledge, preparation, community, and sheer stubborn will, your species has colonized even the coldest corners of the earth. The people of Yakutia wake each morning, tend their fires, care for their animals, send their children to school, love, laugh, argue, dream, and live full human lives in temperatures that would kill the unprepared in minutes. They are not superhuman. They simply carry knowledge. Some of it scientific, some of it traditional, all of it hard-won through generations of experience. And now you carry a tiny portion of that knowledge too. You have touched the cold and survived. You have experienced the edge and stepped back. You have learned what minus 71 degrees Celsius means, not as an abstract number, but as a felt reality. Sleep now warm and safe, knowing that somewhere out there, in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, fires still burn, people still endure, and human life continues its quiet defiance of the impossible. The cold waits outside, patient and eternal, but so too does the warmth within, the fire that will not be extinguished, the human spirit that refuses to surrender. Rest now, dream of warmth, and remember you survived the coldest night.